Resuming debate, the honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with members to share my own personal experience and what it's shown me, as well as what experts have told many members in this House. That is, the decision to legalize marijuana is being rushed, and it is the people of Canada that will pay the price. I'd like to start at the onset and state that I do support efforts to decriminalize the possession of small amounts of marijuana, which would free up our courts, reduce law enforcement resources, and for those persons caught with minor possession offences, they would not receive a criminal record. Those minor offences can be dealt with by way of a Provincial Procedures Act ticket and a fine. However, legalizing marijuana is a move in the wrong direction, in my opinion. As I've said before, it is the top priority of members of this House, of elected officials everywhere, to place the safety and security of Canadians first. I expect nothing less of my colleagues on either side of the House. Instead of helping, this bill will place extra burden on provinces, municipalities, and police agencies. It potentially has the ability to allow organized crime to use legitimate licensing for trafficking. It puts the health and safety of Canadians at risk. It jeopardizes the development of our youth. It will increase mental health issues for those who are most at risk, and subsequently the demand for mental health services and on mental health services will be increased. Of course, in addition to these problems, we can add significant red tape and taxes, a theme for the current government as they make life more difficult for the middle class and those working hard to leave it. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address a few of the public misconceptions about marijuana before I address the government's misaligned agenda. Often Canadians believe marijuana impacts the users much like alcohol. However, in speaking with experts, we know that marijuana takes seconds to impact the brain. The user feels and exhibits the effects immediately. That means impairment can begin immediately after use, seconds after use. The peak effects are reached within 10 to 30 minutes. Marijuana users feel and exhibit the effects of marijuana for up to 2 to 3 hours, and they feel normal again after 3 to 6 hours. However, when that feeling ends, unlike alcohol, the impact of the drug continues. It can take up to 24 hours for the effects of marijuana to stop impacting critical functions, depending on the strength of the THC in the drug and the frequency of use. Now, you may ask, Mr. Speaker, what are those critical functions? Well, obviously, first of all, marijuana use is as dangerous as impairment is not recognized first by the user and others who are interacting with them. Marijuana use has a direct impact on the complex system of critical thinking skills and reflexes. It impairs perceptions like balance, motor coordination, reaction times, and it narrows the vision. It also delays decision-making. All of these things will have a broad-ranging negative impact on everyday life in Canada. I asked my constituents, Mr. Speaker, for feedback on this issue over the summer. The results were overwhelmingly opposed. 80% of my constituents surveyed opposed legalization. 73% said it is a threat to our public safety, and 75% said it would be an added cost to our taxpayers in the years to come. Listening to my constituents and the evidence of experts, I know that voting against this bill is the right thing to do. Many in my riding and across the country question the government's decision to rush the legislation forward, given that the Canadian Police Association and many others are urging patience and preparation. It would seem reasonable that good policy making would make sure all the necessary tools and research were in place first, before moving forward. And yet, we hear loud and clear from the police and many others that they are just not ready. Police, provinces, and municipalities are just not ready. Mr. Speaker, this government has failed to address numerous issues around policing and how this legislation will work. First, how officers can and will manage impaired drivers related to drugs such as marijuana. The chiefs of police have noted that 6,000 officers will require a 3-phase training program that can take up to 100 days to complete the 3-phase training. And yet there is not nearly enough time to complete all of that training before next July. We know today what the legal limits are and impacts of impaired driving related to alcohol, and there are clear guidelines and testing for that. However, we do not know and have any clear idea of the impact of marijuana. With a 24-hour potential period where impairment can exist, how will testing take place at roadside? There are limited officers and equipment that can be deployed if we have detection that's going to be court approved. Now, what if a driver has consumed both alcohol and marijuana? As pointed out to me by experts, you may be able to pass a drug test and an alcohol test, but the two combined will mean significant impairment. In fact, smoking marijuana can mean a 28% increased impairment when combined with alcohol. And as pointed out by the Insurance Institute of Canada, there are disconnects between drug-impaired driving arrests and convictions. As a precedent, an Ontario man was recently acquitted twice of drug-impaired driving because the evidence was deemed inadmissible. So police need time and equipment to get ready for legalization. We need research to know what the limits should be and how the testing needs to be accomplished. The risks are real, Mr. Speaker. Thanks to stats from Mothers Against Drunk Driving, we know that there are more roadside fatalities due to drugs than alcohol in 2012, but convictions remain almost all alcohol related. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are left to wonder if insurance companies are ready for the challenges and are their customers ready for the increased fees. This new legislation or legalization will most certainly impact business, automotive, and private health care coverage. For drunk drivers, they face an immediate cancellation of their policy. We can guess the same may be true related to marijuana. But do users and insurers know about the 24-hour impact of this drug and the impairment impact? In workplaces, will an accident caused by a worker who is impaired by marijuana impact the owner's personal liabilities? Will workplace that has an accident mean that the company can't get insurance anymore, or will have to pay hefty premiums? If marijuana is legal, can workers be punished for being high at work? Has the government thought through these ramifications and potentially increased costs to Canadians? Mr. Speaker, I think most Canadians will be surprised to learn that the government has listed protecting youth as a reason for advocating and advancing this legislation. Governments have worked for over 3 generations to reduce smoking, a major killer in Canada. Recently, the use of marijuana for youth between the ages of 15 and 24 has dropped to 24%. And today we're introducing access and conditions to allow more youth to use this addictive substance. Changing the law to allow households to grow their own marijuana undermines the government's intent to limit access to youth. Putting plants in homes provides opportunity for easy use. Allowing youth, we're talking youth, ages 12 to 17, to possess less than 5 grams of marijuana, which is 10 joints, makes it easier for youth to acquire and possess the drug. To suggest that access will drop seems absolutely ludicrous. Youth ages 12 to 17, possession should be 0, not up to 5 grams. Marijuana is addictive, and the use of marijuana is linked to increased psychotic illness in those who are vulnerable. By making it accessible and readily available to our youth, we are actually decreasing the possibility of success for our next generation. Can we learn nothing from today's dangerous opioid crisis? Teenagers are being hurt and killed by the illegal manufacturing and distribution of this substance. How does legalizing marijuana help our youth today? And finally, Mr. Speaker, I need to comment on the government's commitment to shift money away from organized crime by legalizing marijuana. Tackling organized crime does not involve making their activities legal and regulated. Legalizing gambling didn't eliminate the mafia in Nevada, and it didn't stop the Hells Angels in Canada from obtaining a permit to grow marijuana in Canada and then selling the marijuana illegally. These are not simple, small organizations. They are complex, multinational, and with extensive resources. To quote the government's own 2016 documents, as the experiences of other jurisdictions and of the regulation of alcohol and tobacco in Canada have shown, regulating a substance does not automatically remove it from illicit markets, as evidenced by importation and sales of contraband tobacco. Given the degree to which organized crime is currently involved in the marijuana market, they could continue to produce marijuana illicitly and may attempt to infiltrate the regulated industry. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the government has said it is embarking on this path to legalize marijuana to accomplish protecting our youth, reducing the burden on the justice system, and reducing the flow of organized crime and money. The testimony and evidence suggests this bill will fail to deliver on all of these objectives. The question remains, will this government listen to the many groups pointed to the clear problems? Will they listen to police, to their own officials? Will they listen to those in the communities saying that this is a bad idea? Mr. Speaker, it is rushing the process, and decision-making goes against the recommendations of police and medical professions, and it's our youth, our most vulnerable populations, that will pay the price because of this government's incompetence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Oakville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to thank my honourable colleague for his presentation, but I have to say I'm a bit confused. If I understood his basic presentation, we should remain with the status quo. So right now, marijuana is ubiquitous in our society. Our youth are one of the heaviest users of marijuana in the developed world. So in his own writing right now, people are driving drug impaired. People are consuming cannabis that they don't know what the source is, they don't know what it's contaminated with, and the police are undertrained and under-equipped to deal with these problems. So our government has committed $274 million to support law enforcement, $161 million for training frontline officers to solve these problems today. We are investing significantly in education to make sure the youth understand the risks and the hazards of using marijuana, and we're taking active steps to get these out of the hands of youth. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the member is, why would he be so happy with the status quo when there's known abusers in his own community?
Great question.
Well, member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my friend across the way for his great question. I'm not proposing the status quo. I'm proposing a decriminalization of minor possession. I support the whole concept behind finding and giving police extra powers, to giving police the opportunity to test and do drug testing with the proper equipment. My concern is, A, this government seems so intent on rushing this legislation with a magic deadline of July of 2018, and nobody's ready for this. Like no one's ready for it at all. And it would seem, I mean, I don't support the legalization of marijuana at all, but it would seem, if this government's so intent on it, that they would at least make attempts to provide the mechanisms and the equipment and the training to have it done in place ahead of time before we get onslaught, because it will affect public safety. And I think we'd be naive to suggest that we're all going to be ready by 2018, July of 2018, and everything's going to be fine because we're all going to have it under control. I think that's a little fairy tale, to be honest with you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Windsor West.
For his comments. One of the clarification points I'd like to have is one of the things that's important for ridings like mine that are on the border is the issue with regards to criminal records and criminalization that continues. So say, for example, I have a number of cases where when the truck drivers that I represent are 16, 17 years of age, were caught with marijuana, charged, and have a federal criminal offense on their record right now. Now they've gone through the rest of their life with no other records, but still have this hanging over and that are actually on the border causing problems, despite the fact they drive for one of the big three, have no other records. Would the member in the Conservative Party support the decriminalization and, I guess, a pardoning of those records so we do not have unnecessary border tie-ups, traffic, and problems from basically something that may have taken place for an individual 20, 30 years ago who has no subsequent criminal record? On those cases, would they support making sure that those individuals no longer have a criminal record?
Well, member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my friend for his great question. There is a mechanism that exists in law today where anyone convicted of a criminal offense can apply for a pardon. And my suggestion would be is that those individuals who are in occupation that their previous record creates problems for them to cross the border and for their employment, that they seek to apply for a pardon. I think it would be irresponsible for any government to suggest that we are going to completely wipe away records of the past whenever they were committed 5 years ago, 25 years ago. They were the law of the land. And you made a choice back in that day to commit an offense. And you live with the consequences of those criminal offenses. Moving forward, as I said in the onset of my presentation, Mr. Speaker, I'm a firm believer that we can lighten the load on our courts, we can make things easier for law enforcement resources, and we can decriminalize the minor possessions, small amounts, for those that it can be a fine, Provincial Procedures Act offense, not a criminal record, and be dealt with much like a speeding ticket, for those who may not understand the provincial, how the Provincial Procedures Act works. And we can eliminate that for the minor offences. That should answer the question, I hope, Mr. Speaker.
Conformément à l'article 38